Hello everyone out there. We are continuing with part 2 of our traps in Alekhines defense. So let's go. E4, knight f6, and knight c3. D5, e5, knight e4, knight takes e4, d takes e4, d4, e takes d3 en passant, bishop d3, knight c6, queen e2, knight d4, queen e4, and bishop f5, and queen takes b7. Now what should black play here to exploit the many queen moves that white has made? Well, remember the idea of removing the defender. So think, this knight could come here, he can win a rook, because he would be checking the king on e1 and the rook on a1. However, the c2 pawn is defended at the moment by this bishop on d3. Therefore, we remove the defender. After bishop takes d3, c takes d3, and then if we play king d2, knight c2 check, then the tables will turn, as after king takes king to d2, and for instance knight to a1, queen c6 will mean trouble, because then the only defense is queen d7, but now the rook would be undefended. And after queen takes a8, queen back, queen takes d8 check, king d8, king c3, this poor knight is trapped. And after a few moves, for instance king d7, knight f3, e6, bishop e3, this rook will capture this knight on a1. So you have to be careful about rushing in. So after bishop takes d3, c takes d3, which is correct. Instead of rushing in here right away, we play rook to b8, which eliminates the tactics of the last variation. Now after, for instance, queen takes a7, now black can go ahead and win the rook. Alright, let's look at our next one. e4, knight f6, knight c3, d5, and just let me state that e5 is fully playable and you will be in a Vienna game, which normally goes f4, d5, and you're in a totally different opening, although black is okay. So depending on your preference, your preparation, and your style of play, you might choose to simply play e5 when white avoids the push. However, many Alekhine players like to try to keep the game in their style of play, so to speak. So many Alekhine players will play d5 here, and after e takes d5, knight takes d5, This is similar to a Scandinavian. And you might ask, well, what's the Scandinavian? Scandinavian is e4 d5. And say, for instance, after e takes d5, knight f6. And let's just say knight c3 for argument's sake. Knight d5. And we have a similar position. So it's good to know different openings just for transpositional value. So after knight f6, knight c3, d5, e takes, knight takes d5, there's that position. Knight f3, bishop f5, knight takes d5, queen takes d5, and what do you think about this normal looking move, d4? Well, after d4, queen e4 check, and then the c2 pawn is in a little bit of trouble here. But the queen has moved a few times, and after bishop to e3, queen takes c2, queen takes c2, bishop takes c2, rook c1, bishop e4, and rook takes c6. White has some lead in development for the pawn, but black has a better pawn structure. But he is behind in development. Meanwhile, he has this isolated pawn to attack, and I think in the long run, black should come out, because unless white is able to utilize this lead in development, black should be able to consolidate. But I would say this position is equal. Alright, e4, knight f6, knight c3, d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5. Again, we have transposed to Scandinavian. Knight ge2. Some players like to do that to avoid the doubling of the pawns. Bishop f5. Again, a normal looking move is to simply occupy the center with d4. Now, amazingly, in this innocuous looking position, black is winning after the simple move knight b4, attacking the c2 pawn. Alright, let's look at our next one. So e4, knight f6, knight c3 again, d5, e takes, knight takes, knight ge2, knight c6, g3, bishop g4, bishop g2, knight d4. Notice that the knight cannot capture this knight. The knight on e2 cannot capture the knight on d4 because the bishop is, the bishop is pinning the knight to this queen. So after knight d4, instead, bishop takes d5. But it seems like it's winning a piece, but white is in for a rude awakening after queen takes d5, knight takes d5, knight f3 check, king f1, and bishop h3 mate. Let's look at that again. So again, after knight g2, knight c6, g3, bishop g4, bishop g2, knight d4, offering the piece on d5, bishop takes d5, queen takes d5. Notice the rook is attacked on h1 by the queen. And notice how with the light square bishop going from g2, how weak the light squares are. And after knight takes d5, knight f3, and notice the knight on f3 guards the dark squares of e1 and g1, and therefore the bishop simply occupies the vacated light squares. Next one, e4, knight f6, knight c3, d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight g e2, knight c6, g3, bishop g4, bishop g2, knight d4, same position again, bishop takes d5, queen takes d5. Now we already saw in the last variation that knight takes, queen is wrong due to the mate. After knight to f3 check, king f1, and then bishop h3. So therefore, what if white just castles? Well, this weakness is just a little bit too much on the light squares for white to handle. And after knight f3, king g2, and we see the king is brought into the same diagonal as the queen, which spells disaster. Knight h4, now we have a double check, the knight and the queen, king g1, and queen g2. Here's another mating idea, e4, knight f6, knight c3, d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight ge2, knight c6, g3, bishop g4, bishop g2, knight d4, drilling that idea into your head. Bishop takes d5, queen takes d5, again castle, knight f3, and instead of king g2, this time king h1, same idea. Knight g5 check from the queen, knight takes d5. So it must be okay to do it now, right? Wrong, because after bishop f3 check, king g1, knight h3. So the basic theme and idea of those last three short miniatures was simply to demonstrate that the light square weakness around, especially after fee and kettling, is just can be very, 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 very devastating. Um, whereby black can even give up its queen in this variation and still mate with the bishop and knight around the light squares. Okay, we'll look at one more. E4, knight f6, knight c3 again, d5, e takes d5, and don't worry, we'll be getting to the main, um, more common lines in Alekhines defense. Start with these like offbeat lines first. Knight takes d5, and here we go. Bishop c4. Again, transpose into the Scandinavian. Normal is move like knight b6. It usually drops back, which is playable. E6 is also playable. But for this game, knight takes c3 was played. Bishop takes c3. Normally, I don't prefer as black to play lines like this, where you accelerate white's development. For instance, my opening lines for the bishop and the rook to come to the b file early in the game like that, because it's going to take a long time to get to the ending from this position. And yeah, in the end game, black is better because of the pawn structure, but there's a lot of chess to be played until you get to that point. And opening up lines early usually um, favors white in these type of positions. He already has a lead in development. So after after b takes c3, knight c6, d4, again rapidly opening up lines, taking control of the center. Knight a5. Now we already spoke about the lead in development and having to open lines. This is a bad move. Everybody learns the term knight on the rim is dim, and here it's real dim, because after a simple tactic, bishop takes f7, king takes f7, and queen h5, and pick up the knight. Okay, so just falling behind in development, and then just playing a dubious move, attacking the piece, led to quick demise. Alright, and now, yeah, let's do one last one. So e4, knight f6, knight c3, d5, e takes, knight takes, bishop c4. There's e6, like I said, one of the normal moves. Bishop takes d5. Now this is bad for white because he's just giving up a nice bishop that's totally unprovoked, and bringing black's pawn, the e pawn, which is blocking the bishop, to the center, just giving black full equality unprovoked. So that's a bad move. E takes d5, and black has no worries. Now black has a nice say in the center and the bishop pair. Black is slightly better. Queen e2, check. Bishop e6. And white is able to capture the pawn after queen b5, check. However, I think it's a poison pawn because, again, it's bad policy to go pawn chasing with the queen early in the game like that. So giving up the bishop pair just to win a pawn, especially the B pawn in the opening, is a dubious idea. So that's why I wanted to show you this example. After queen takes queen b5 check, just simply knight c6. It's continuing on with development, taking the lead in development rather. And then let's say after queen takes b7, right? You know, taking the pawn and challenging the knight on c6. Well, the knight jumps into b4, attacking the c2 pawn, and there's really no way to defend this. So therefore, white can only try to counterattack, say with knight b5, threatening a fork of his own. So rook c8, and now he defends his c2 square. Bishop d6, and let's say a move like a3, just kick the knight out of there. Rook b8, rook a8, and if black wants, he can have perpetual by just going back and forth. But here he can just castle, because a takes b4 is not possible because the pin. And we can see here that black's position is superior. Here's after castles, nice lead in development. There's a bishop here, and he's ready to attack. So that little pawn grab at the beginning by white is definitely not worth it. So be careful of doing that in the opening. Always put the position first and then material. And if you learn to put the position first, the material will just come as a result. Your opponent's position will just it's like planting a tree. You do all the things that you're supposed to do, water the tree and give it fertile soil, then eventually the fruit will come naturally. You don't have to do anything to try to rush its growth. It'll come on its own. And it's the same with the chess position. If you just do the right things, follow the principles, and don't do anything that's hasty like in this position, then the position will bear good fruit for you. Alright, that's it for today, and subscribe, and see you on the next video.